It started quietly. No dramatic goodbye, no slammed doors, just a slow, aching silence that filled the spaces where laughter used to live. The mornings that once began with warmth turned into cold rituals of pretending. I'd wake up beside someone who was already gone in every way that mattered. Somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror. She looked tired, dimmed, like her own reflection was apologizing for taking up space. I spent years trying to fix what was never mine to heal, bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes just to be understood. But the more I tried, the more invisible I became. It wasn't until the weight of his absence settled into my life that I realized it wasn't loss I was feeling. It was the start of something quietly powerful. When everything fell apart, I found myself standing in the middle of a silence I used to fear. For the first time in years, there was no one asking where I was going, no one to text when I got home, no one whose moods I had to navigate before I could breathe. The emptiness was strange at first, loud in its quietness, like walking into a room where a party had just ended. I had built my world around another person for so long that I forgot what it felt like to simply exist on my own terms. Those first few weeks I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd wake up expecting to hear his voice, make breakfast for two out of habit, and scroll through my phone for a message that would never come. But slowly, that ache started to shift into something else, a calm, unfamiliar sense of control. I began doing things just because I wanted to, not because they would make someone else happy. I rearranged my apartment, changed the curtains, filled the space with scents and colors that felt like me. I started cooking again, but this time with music playing and no pressure to impress anyone. I took long walks at sunset, letting the world remind me that it kept turning even when my life had stopped for a while. The freedom felt strange, almost guilty, like I was cheating on a version of myself that only knew how to give. But day by day, that guilt faded, replaced by a quiet pride. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval anymore. Rediscovering independence wasn't a sudden transformation. It was a slow, steady climb. I had to unlearn the habit of asking for permission to live. I realized how much of my identity had been tied to being someone's partner, someone's support, someone's shadow. I had always been strong, but that strength had been used for someone else's comfort. Now, I was learning to use it for my own peace. I started saying no to things that drained me, even when it made others uncomfortable. I set boundaries, even when my voice trembled. There was power in choosing myself, and though it felt foreign at first, it was the kind of power that once found, you never let go of again. There were lonely nights, of course. Moments when I missed the illusion of companionship, when I questioned if I had made a mistake. But those moments became my teachers. They showed me that loneliness isn't the same as being alone. Being alone was actually the most honest state I had ever been in. It gave me room to listen to my thoughts, to sit with my emotions instead of running from them. I learned to find beauty in my own company, to take myself out to dinner, to buy flowers just because I liked them, to read late into the night, without anyone asking when I'd turn off the light. With each passing day, I began to feel more grounded. I no longer measured my worth through someone else's eyes. I started focusing on what made me feel alive, writing again, exploring new hobbies, meeting people who brought laughter instead of judgment. I realized how capable I was, how many things I had once depended on him for that I could now do on my own. The independence that once scared me became the foundation of my healing. It wasn't about proving that I didn't need anyone. It was about remembering that I had always had everything I needed within me. What surprised me most was how peace began to replace the chaos I once called love. I no longer felt the urge to chase validation or fix what was broken. I understood that independence didn't mean isolation. It meant being whole enough to share yourself without losing yourself. There was a quiet strength in waking up every morning and knowing that my happiness didn't rely on someone else's moods or attention. I could make plans without consulting anyone, make mistakes without being judged, and dream without limits. Slowly, freedom stopped feeling like loss and started feeling like arrival. Every small choice I made for myself was an act of reclaiming the pieces I had given away. I was no longer defined by the role I played in someone else's story. I was writing my own, one that didn't need validation or explanation. The independence I had once feared became the most beautiful part of my life, the foundation for everything that was yet to come. Building a new lifestyle centered on self-worth and peace didn't happen overnight. It began in fragments, in the quiet choices I made each day to protect my energy and rebuild from within. For so long, my life had revolved around someone else's moods, needs, and expectations. I was used to walking on eggshells, adjusting myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. But once I was free, I realized I could create a life that actually reflected who I was, not who I had been told to be. It started with small, almost invisible changes. Waking up early to watch the sunrise, lighting candles at night instead of scrolling through messages that would never come, writing affirmations that reminded me I was enough. These tiny rituals became the foundation of a peaceful routine, one that honored my presence instead of apologizing for it. I began to understand that self-worth wasn't about perfection or performance. It was about value that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I stopped chasing validation and started nurturing my confidence, like it was something fragile and sacred. Every time I looked in the mirror, I made a conscious effort to see myself differently, not through the lens of rejection or comparison, but through compassion. I learned to appreciate the parts of me I used to hide, the scars and softness that made me human. For the first time in a long time, I felt at home in my own skin. It wasn't vanity, it was liberation. Peace came when I stopped fighting everything. My past, my mistakes, my loneliness. Instead of filling the silence with distractions, I began to sit with it. I learned to listen to my intuition again, to trust that quiet voice that had been silenced by years of self-doubt. I spent more time in nature, walking through open spaces that reminded me how big the world really was. I took deep breaths and let myself exist without explanation. That's when I realized peace isn't something you find. It's something you build, choice by choice, moment by moment. It comes from protecting your boundaries, saying no when it's necessary, and allowing yourself to rest without guilt. As my sense of peace grew stronger, so did my understanding of luxury. I used to think luxury was measured in expensive gifts or grand gestures, but I learned that true luxury is comfort within yourself. It's being able to wake up without anxiety, to walk into your home and feel safe, to spend time with people who uplift you instead of drain you. I started creating a space that reflected that energy. Soft lighting, calming scents, fresh flowers, and music that made me feel alive. Every detail in my environment became a reflection of the peace I was cultivating inside. My home stopped being a reminder of loss and started becoming a sanctuary. Self-worth also reshaped the way I worked, dressed, and carried myself. I started taking my ambition seriously again, no longer holding myself back out of fear of being too much. I invested in my growth, took courses, learned new skills, and explored passions I had put aside. I dressed not to impress but to express, to mirror the confidence that was slowly blooming within. Even my social circle changed. I began surrounding myself with people who respected my boundaries and matched my energy, those who saw my growth not as a threat, but as inspiration. I realized that peace thrives in environments of honesty and mutual respect, and I refused to settle for less ever again. There were still moments of doubt, days when the old wounds ached, when I questioned whether I was truly healing or just surviving, but I reminded myself that peace isn't the absence of struggle, it's the ability to stay calm through it. I stopped trying to control every outcome and started trusting the flow of my own journey. With each challenge I faced, I discovered a resilience I never knew I had. I no longer needed to be saved, I was saving myself, one decision at a time. Slowly, this new lifestyle became more than just healing, it became my identity. I wasn't living in reaction to pain anymore, I was living in response to joy. My days became softer, fuller, and more intentional. I learned that the greatest luxury is having peace of mind and the self-worth to protect it fiercely. I no longer chased things that weren't meant for me, I attracted what aligned with who I had become. I stopped waiting for someone to understand me, because I had finally learned to understand myself. Transforming pain into motivation for personal and financial growth became one of the most powerful chapters of my life. Heartbreak has a strange way of stripping you down to your core. It exposes the rawest parts of you, the places you didn't know were capable of rebuilding. When everything fell apart, I felt hollow at first, like my world had been reduced to fragments of what used to be. But beneath that pain was something fierce, something quietly determined. I had spent so long giving my energy to someone else's dreams that I had forgotten how capable I was of creating my own. The emptiness that once terrified me slowly began to look like space I could fill with purpose, with ambition, with something that was truly mine. At first I didn't have a plan. I only had the anger, the disappointment, and the heartbreak that refused to let me rest. But instead of letting those emotions destroy me, I decided to use them. Every tear, every sleepless night, every flash of memory became fuel. I realized I could either drown in the pain or turn it into fire. I chose the latter. I started setting small goals, things that gave me structure when everything else felt chaotic. I made lists, created routines, and built a vision board that reminded me every day what I was working toward. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was redesigning it with purpose. I threw myself into learning, books, podcasts, online courses, anything that could help me grow. I began to rediscover passions I had put aside, talents I hadn't used in years. I started working harder, smarter, and with more clarity than ever before. What used to feel like survival turned into creation. I no longer wanted to prove my worth to anyone. I wanted to build a life that proved it to myself. My pain gave me focus. It sharpened my perspective and made me realize that the only security I would ever truly have was the one I built with my own hands. Financial growth became part of that transformation, not out of greed but out of freedom. I wanted the kind of independence that meant I would never have to shrink or settle again. I began managing my money differently, saving with intention, investing in myself, and saying yes to opportunities that scared me. I stopped letting fear dictate my choices. I learned the power of discipline, the strength it takes to stay consistent even when motivation fades. The more I worked, the more confident I became. I wasn't just earning money, I was earning back my sense of control. As I grew financially, I noticed how deeply it affected my self-image. I no longer felt powerless or dependent. I realized that success wasn't about luxury alone. It was about self-respect. It was about knowing I could take care of myself, make my own decisions, and stand firmly on my own foundation. I started attracting new energy into my life. People who inspired me, mentors who encouraged me, friends who celebrated my wins without envy. It was as if the universe had been waiting for me to step into this version of myself all along. Of course, there were moments of exhaustion, days when doubt crept back in, whispering that maybe I wasn't ready or capable. But then I would remember how far I'd already come. Pain had once brought me to my knees, and now it was the reason I stood taller than ever. It wasn't about pretending I wasn't hurt. It was about allowing that hurt to become a catalyst. I learned to thank the pain instead of cursing it, because without it I might never have discovered what I was capable of achieving. As my life evolved, so did my mindset. I stopped associating success with revenge or validation. It wasn't about showing anyone what they lost. It was about showing myself what I could gain. Every milestone, no matter how small, felt like reclaiming another piece of the confidence I had once given away. I realized that thriving wasn't just a result of healing, it was a decision to keep moving forward no matter how hard it got. The same pain that once felt unbearable had now become my greatest teacher. It taught me resilience, patience, and self-trust. It made me understand that true growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from challenge. I no longer looked at my past as a wound. I saw it as the foundation of my strength. What was once heartbreak had transformed into power, and what was once loss had become freedom. Surrounding myself with genuine connections and positive energy became one of the most healing and transformative decisions I ever made. After spending years in an environment where my emotions were dismissed and my efforts went unnoticed, I realized how much energy I had wasted trying to be understood by the wrong people. When the relationship ended, I found myself standing alone. But in that solitude, I began to see clearly who truly cared for me and who had only been there out of convenience. It was painful at first, watching some people fade away when I no longer served their narrative, but losing shallow connections created space for something much more meaningful, authentic relationships that felt light, safe, and real. At the beginning, I was cautious about letting anyone in. I had learned the hard way that not everyone deserves access to your heart. I took my time observing people's intentions, listening to their words but watching their actions even more closely. I began to value consistency over charm, honesty over flattery, and kindness over convenience. I realized that genuine connections don't drain you, they replenish you. The people meant to stay in your life don't make you question your worth, they remind you of it. Little by little, I built a circle of souls who didn't compete, gossip, or judge, but instead encouraged and supported. These were the people who cheered for my growth, even when it meant I was changing. For the first time, my conversations felt real. There was no pretending, no need to minimize my happiness or exaggerate my struggles just to fit in. I could speak openly about my dreams, my healing, my boundaries, and my peace without feeling misunderstood. I started spending time with people who made me laugh genuinely, who brought calm instead of chaos, and who reminded me that love, whether romantic or platonic, should never feel heavy. Being around positive energy didn't mean life became perfect. It meant that even during difficult moments I no longer felt alone. I also learned to protect my energy fiercely. I stopped forcing connections with people who made me feel small or uncertain. If a conversation constantly left me drained or anxious, I allowed myself to step back. I no longer chased people to stay in my life, I let them leave if they needed to. There was a time when I thought losing people meant failure, but now I understood that detachment could be an act of self-love. I discovered the peace that comes from silence, from keeping your circles small but genuine. Energy doesn't lie, and when you start honoring yours, you attract others who are doing the same. Being surrounded by positive people also helped me rebuild trust in humanity. It reminded me that not everyone would hurt me, that there are still kind, loyal, and empathetic hearts in the world. The more I focused on gratitude and kindness, the more it seemed to return to me in unexpected ways. I started saying yes to new experiences, meeting people who shared my values, and forming connections, rooted in mutual respect rather than need. It wasn't about finding perfection, it was about finding balance. I realized that the right people don't complete you, they complement your growth. Positive energy became something I actively cultivated in every area of my life. I changed my environment, filled my home with light, music, and warmth. I practiced mindfulness, learned to release grudges, and replaced complaints with gratitude. I noticed that the more I surrounded myself with uplifting energy, the more opportunities and inspiration seemed to flow toward me. It was as if the universe was responding to my openness by sending me what I had been missing all along. I no longer tolerated negativity or drama, because I finally understood my peace was too precious to sacrifice. These genuine connections also helped me rediscover joy in the simplest things, sharing a meal with friends who made me laugh until I cried, long late-night talks about dreams and fears, spontaneous adventures that reminded me of how beautiful life can be when shared with the right people. There was an ease, a lightness, a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. The people in my life now didn't just occupy space, they added value. They saw me not as someone broken but as someone evolving. They didn't try to fix me, they simply walked beside me as I healed. In time, I realized that love exists in many forms, and friendship can be just as healing as romance. These connections became the mirror through which I saw my progress, the reflection of the love and energy I was finally giving myself. I had spent years trying to earn love, but now I was surrounded by people who gave it freely, without condition or expectation. It made me realize that genuine energy is rare, but worth waiting for, and when you finally allow it into your life, it changes everything. Redefining luxury through self-care, travel, and freedom of choice became the most unexpected reward of my healing journey. For years, I associated luxury with material things, designer labels, fancy dinners, gifts that came with conditions. I used to believe that the value of love and success could be measured in what someone bought for me or what we showed the world. But when everything was stripped away, I realized that true luxury isn't about excess. It's about peace. It's about waking up without anxiety, doing what you love without guilt, and living life on your own terms. I learned that luxury could be quiet, simple, and deeply personal. My new definition of luxury began with self-care, not as an occasional indulgence, but as a daily act of respect for myself. I started treating my body and mind as something sacred instead of something that needed to constantly perform. Mornings became my favorite part of the day, a cup of coffee by the window, soft music playing, a moment to breathe before the world began demanding things from me. I invested in routines that made me feel grounded, skincare not for beauty but for peace, journaling to release thoughts instead of suppressing them, long baths that washed away more than just the day's exhaustion. I learned that taking care of myself wasn't selfish. It was survival, it was strength, and it was the foundation for everything else I wanted to build. Travel became another expression of this newfound luxury. For so long I had limited myself, waiting for the right time or the right person to explore the world. But now, I traveled for myself, to see, to breathe, to rediscover wonder. The first solo trip I took was terrifying and liberating at the same time. There was something magical about boarding a plane with no one to answer to, about choosing a destination just because it called to me. Each place I visited became a mirror of my freedom, a reminder that the world was wide and full of beauty I had yet to experience. I walked through foreign streets, tasted foods I couldn't pronounce, and laughed with strangers who reminded me how small my pain really was compared to the size of life itself. Traveling alone made me realize that I was capable of creating joy anywhere I went. Luxury also meant having the freedom to make choices without fear or compromise. I began saying yes to opportunities that aligned with my values and no to anything that disrupted my peace. I stopped explaining my decisions to people who weren't living my life. That freedom, the ability to choose how I spend my time, where I go, who I allow into my world, became priceless. I no longer felt the need to justify resting or slowing down. I worked hard but balanced it with intentional stillness. I spent money on things that brought true joy. Books, art, experiences, and moments that fed my soul instead of my ego. The more I simplified my life, the richer it felt. I also started surrounding myself with beauty, not in a superficial sense but as an act of appreciation. Fresh flowers on my table, soft fabrics that made me feel at home, a room that smelled like calm instead of chaos. These small details turned my environment into a sanctuary. I didn't need a mansion or a luxury car to feel fulfilled. I needed authenticity, harmony, and space to breathe. Luxury was being able to rest without guilt, to speak my truth without fear, and to live a life that reflected who I truly was, not who I was expected to be. Every decision I made was now guided by peace and intention. I learned that luxury could mean an afternoon with no plans, time spent with people who uplifted me, or a walk under the evening sky after a long day. It wasn't about how much I had, it was about how aligned I felt. I no longer measured success by comparison, I measured it by contentment. The most luxurious thing I had ever experienced was my own self-respect, the kind that couldn't be bought or borrowed. The woman I became no longer sought luxury to impress others, she created it within herself. My peace, my freedom, and my choices became the symbols of a life rebuilt on my terms. What once looked like loss had transformed into abundance, not of things but of meaning, of serenity, of self-love that radiated in everything I did. Realizing that true understanding begins with understanding myself was the most profound shift in my entire journey. For years I had sought validation from others, constantly trying to be understood, loved, and accepted in ways I hadn't yet learned to offer myself. I thought connection came from proving my worth to someone else, by being patient, forgiving, accommodating, and endlessly giving. I didn't realize that in doing so, I had silenced my own voice, ignored my intuition, and overlooked what I truly needed. When everything fell apart, and the noise of someone else's expectations faded, I was left alone with the one person I had never really taken the time to know, myself. That silence, though terrifying at first, became the beginning of real understanding. In that stillness, I started asking questions I had avoided for years. What do I actually want? What makes me happy? What kind of love do I need and what kind of energy do I give? The answers didn't come easily. They came slowly, sometimes painfully, but always honestly. I realized that I had been so focused on being enough for someone else that I never stopped to see that I had always been enough for me. I began to understand that I didn't lose myself because someone took me away. I lost myself because I stopped listening. Learning to understand myself meant learning to hear that quiet inner voice that had been drowned out by doubt and fear. It meant being patient with my emotions, even the uncomfortable ones, instead of trying to bury them. Self-understanding also meant confronting my past, not with regret, but with compassion. I revisited moments that once haunted me, times when I stayed too long, forgave too quickly, or gave too much. Instead of blaming myself, I started to see the reasons behind those choices. I was just a person trying to love, to belong, to be seen. That realization softened something inside me. I stopped treating my past self like a mistake and started seeing her as a version of me who did the best she could with what she knew. Healing, I learned, isn't about erasing who you were. It's about making peace with her. As I grew in self-awareness, I noticed how my relationships began to change. The more I understood myself, the less I tolerated what didn't align with my peace. I could finally recognize when something felt wrong instead of trying to rationalize it. I stopped explaining my boundaries and started enforcing them. I no longer accepted being misunderstood as a challenge to fix. I accepted it as a sign to walk away. Understanding myself meant I no longer needed to be understood by everyone else. I didn't crave external validation like before, because I had finally learned to give myself internal assurance. I became my own home, and that changed everything. I also started to notice the difference between loneliness and solitude. Before, being alone felt like punishment. Now, it felt like presence. I enjoyed spending time with myself, doing things I loved without needing company to make them meaningful. I read more, journaled more, and took long drives with no destination. I realized that peace isn't found in people. It's found in knowing you can be content even when no one is around. Understanding myself taught me that fulfillment doesn't come from being chosen by someone else. It comes from choosing yourself every single day. There were moments of discomfort, moments when old habits tried to return. Sometimes, I caught myself over-explaining, overthinking, or seeking approval again. But now, I could recognize it for what it was, a sign that I was still learning. Instead of feeling ashamed, I used those moments as reminders of how far I'd come. Growth isn't linear, and self-understanding isn't a destination, it's a lifelong process. Every time I fell back into old patterns, I found new wisdom waiting for me on the other side. The deeper I understood myself, the more compassion I developed for others. I realized that everyone carries their own wounds, their own stories of love, loss, and longing. It allowed me to forgive without bitterness and let go without resentment. Understanding myself gave me the ability to move forward with grace, not anger. I stopped needing closure from others because I had found it within me. Now, I live with a sense of clarity I never had before. I understand my worth, my limits, my needs, and my dreams. I don't shrink myself to fit into places that no longer feel right. I've learned that the most important relationship I will ever have is the one I have with myself. When you know who you are, peace becomes your natural state, love flows effortlessly, and you stop chasing understanding because you've finally found it within. In the end, my story isn't about loss, it's about rebirth. What began as heartbreak transformed into a journey of rediscovery, strength, and self-love. I learned that freedom isn't found in being understood by someone else, but in understanding yourself deeply enough to live without needing their approval. I rebuilt my life from silence and turned pain into purpose, solitude into peace, and uncertainty into confidence. I surrounded myself with genuine souls, redefined luxury through inner calm, and realized that my worth was never up for negotiation. Every tear, every setback, every lonely night led me back to myself, the version of me that is whole, grounded, and free. Now I don't chase love or validation. I attract peace, abundance, and joy. I am no longer surviving. I am thriving in the life I created, one built entirely on my own strength and self-worth.